Welcome to our daily Bible devotions. Last time we have tried to explore the 7 historical tests to check the reliability of the New Testament. The first historical test is the question, do we have early testimony? Generally, the earlier the sources, the more accurate the testimony is. And if we're going to ask, are the New Testament documents early? The answer is yes. But the follow-up question is, how early? All New Testament books were actually written before AD 100. That's about 70 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So, if you're going to check the documents, there are actually about 3 historical figures, also church fathers. They're named Clement, Ignatius, and Polycarp. These three, they quoted passages out of the 25 of the 27 books in the New Testament. And they lived around AD 95 to 110 AD. So there's historical record of their existence. And then in their writings, they quoted 25 out of the 27 books. That proves that the documents themselves were early. They were already in existence during that time, and their contents were already around. The message has been there, and if there were people who disagree with the contents of those documents, if there were people who says that, you know what you're saying there is not true, you know what, that's fake news. Just like in our time, if there are fake news, immediately we we bash them, we smash them, we don't allow them to continue to exist. We label them already as, this thing is fake news, that one is fake news, this one is not, it's not credible, it's not reliable, there's no source, so we don't allow it to perpetuate and go around the society. The same way, if these books are early, it means that it's been going around and no one is contesting the contents. And look at this, AD 95 to 110 AD, around 70 years after Jesus' earthly ministry. That's just one generation. If people heard that the contents of these books were wrong, or if they were not in existence, worse, if they were not in existence, they wouldn't be quoted around this time. We can even argue that most, if not all, of these books were written before AD 70. So we're pushing it back closer by 30 years. So that's about 40 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus. Or historically, yes, the death. So imagine this. You're a devout Jew in the first century. The center of your national, economic, and religious life is Jerusalem. And especially, most especially, in your religion, the temple. Now you have to think, maybe you have to imagine this context. Now, if you lived as a Jew during that time, it has been that way in your nation, that the center of life, of everything, it revolves around the temple of Jerusalem. All of your life revolves around that Jerusalem temple. So for your entire life, you have attended services and brought sacrifices to that temple to atone for the sins you've committed against God. Why? Because you and your countrymen consider this temple the earthly dwelling place of the God of the universe. That's your belief if you were a Jew living during that time. So that's your belief. You're making sacrifices in that temple. And then, as a young man, you begin following a Jew named Jesus. Just try to imagine this. Begin following this person named Jesus, who claims to be the long-awaited Messiah. And eventually, he predicted his own death and resurrection, even the destruction of the temple. Now, you can see that in the scriptures. And then those things that they said, those were scandalous. And because of them, Jesus is convicted of blasphemy by your temple priests and is crucified on the eve of the Passover, one of your holiest holidays. He's buried in his Jewish tomb, but 3 days later, you and his other followers see Jesus alive, just as he predicted. Now, if he predicted something, such as his resurrection, and then you saw it happen before your eyes, then you touched him, you ate with him, and then he even continued to perform other miracles, the last being his ascension to heaven. So imagine what would the effect of those things to you. And then after all those things, 40 years later, when 40 years back, he predicted that the temple would be destroyed. 40 years later, your temple, the center of your life, the center of the society, the center of the nation of the Jews, that temple was destroyed by the Romans, just as Jesus had predicted. Not actually just the temple, but along with the entire city and thousands of your countrymen. How would you feel during that time? And if you're going to check the contents of the the New Testament, if you're going to read the New Testament, you will read there how Jesus predicted the destruction of the temple. You will read all other activities there, but there was no mention of the destruction of the temple. There was no mention that it was destroyed in the past. What does that mean? What does that say? It says that all those contents were written before the destruction of that said temple. And if the temple was destroyed AD 70, that means the contents of the New Testaments were written before that. The latest would be 69 AD, but not 70 AD, because if those things were written 70 AD moving forward, they would at least mention the destruction of the temple. A parallel to this would be the 9/11, the attack on the Twin Towers in America. If if there's any document, historical document written past 9/11, there would be normally a mention, especially if it's a hot topic during that time, it would be mentioned. The very fact that you saw a letter from a person who went to the World Trade Center and there was no mention that it was destroyed because that letter was probably written before the Twin Towers were destroyed, before the Twin Towers were attacked. That letter was probably written before the attack. And that's the logic about it. You see how the New Testament actually never talked about the destruction because all those events in the New Testament, they were written, they happened before the destruction of the temple. That's AD 70. That makes the documents very early. And the closer it is to the events, we have already explained this, but the closer the record, the written record to the events being talked about means that the more reliable it is because there's very little chance for distortion. People are still alive to say, you know what, that thing did not happen. I will not allow it to circulate. But these things circulated because most people during that time affirmed they're true. They didn't like it. Many people did not like it. Many people persecuted those who followed the contents, those who circulated the documents, but they could not contest the veracity, the truthfulness, the reliability of the contents of the documents. We will continue tomorrow.